Namaste and in Catch, and welcome to this episode of One World in a New World. And as you know, the apocalyptic chats are about uncovering knowledge, how we bridge that inner and outer reality that we are bereft of doing today because we just don't talk about it. Our objective is to get that out in the open and start talking about it so that we can bridge that gap and create a better future together. This week's guest is Suzette West, and she is, first of all, an ICF, International Coaching Federation certified executive coach. She has a Master of Arts in transformational social change. So I know this is going to be just a phenomenal conversation. So stick around. We'll be right back.
Explore the thought-mosphere. Embark on a life-changing journey of self-discovery. Embrace harmony with self, with others, with Earth. One world in a new world. Zen Benefiel skillfully ignites conversations, guiding guests to reveal personal journeys and perspectives. Listeners are inspired to seek knowledge and find wisdom in their own lives. Join this transformative journey as we navigate the depth of human experience.
Suzette, it is such an honor and a great opportunity to have you with us today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Such a pleasure. Now, I also noticed that you're certified in heart math. I want to tap on that a little bit, but first I want to dive into the archives and maybe understand, knowing that you have had this interconnection for quite some time. When did it first begin? How was life at the time, and how did it first, or how did you first become aware that there was more than just the physical world?
Well, I've I was born empathic. Like I've always had that ability to tap into emotions. And what I did when I was young was I often took on other people's emotions as my own, just because I was young and I didn't understand. But I've always had a connection, some connection, otherworldly connection.
Was there a
And
time, pardon me for interrupting, begging the question, how did you learn that they weren't yours? I've had similar opportunities and was born that way as well. When did you figure out that, oh, those aren't my feelings that I'm feeling?
it wasn't until much later in life. So already, I think I was probably already in my 40s
Hmm,
when I learned about, um, you know, empathic people taking on other people's emotions and not realizing it. Prior to that, it was just I was living in reactivity, and yeah, it was very difficult in
sure,
those early years.
no
So
doubt. So
yeah,
back to the early years, how did that um, affect your socialization?
yeah, so I was it affected it a lot. I mean, my ability to I had like social anxiety really bad because
I
of
can
it.
imagine.
Yeah, it was really bad. But you know, it was a journey that I had to move through to understand empathy, to understand how we take on other people's emotions and not realize it,
Hmm.
how to process emotions, how to be with difficult emotions. All that stuff was just, it was a learning process, and I had to learn to be patient with it.
Sure. Do you think that's what leads or has led us to become a codependent nation?
I think
Because this
for a lot,
sensitivity, the reason I ask that is the sensitivity that we all have and yet don't acknowledge, right? We're constantly people pleasers because we want to feel good about that
well, I think a
instead of
lot of
uncomfortable.
us, yeah, well, I think because emotions are not very well understood, and in a lot of places we're taught to, stuff our emotions. Um, you know, emotions are seen as weak, or like emotions are something to hide or stuff. And that is when we run into problems, when we're stuffing emotions, when we're disconnected from our emotions, and we're not able to learn how to sit with those difficult emotions. We check out.
Mhm.
We fall into addictions. We fall into, uh, people pleasing, anything to not deal with what we're feeling. And I feel like now we're being called more than ever to go inward and to really connect with emotions, because our emotions are the biggest drainers of our energy.
Mhm. What do you think's
Yeah.
causing that? And I'm in agreement. It does feel that there, or seems to anyway, be on exterior wise, there's a questioning that's going on. Internally, there's this sense of almost just a slight rise in energy, if that makes sense. Uh,
Hmm.
well, what do you experience? And you've been in multiple places, and with all the research that you've done on transformative social change, do you see these types of things affecting um, individuals, communities, and the like, and a growing presence of that, or is it still rather subdued?
I think people are starting to learn more about emotional self-regulation, emotional intelligence. What I'd like to say is being coherent, being heart coherent, meaning where
Mm,
the heart and the mind are aligned. This is so important. I mean, especially when you're going through challenges, it's it's our ability to maintain access to our um, executive functioning, like our ability to problem solve, our ability to envision a way forward, as opposed to getting shut out by the stress response. And then we're reacting to things. And it's when we're reacting that we're just acting impulsively. We're not thinking before we speak,
mhm,
or we are judging, or we're being critical, or we're being distrusting. That's that
mhm.
fearful thinking, fearful consciousness.
Absolutely.
We're
And
stuck there. There's a lot of that going on.
yeah.
It's
Now, do you think also that there is a presence of a sense of not being understood that comes before we even begin to speak sometimes? And so it retards or um, doesn't allow us to distill coherent thinking and thoughts into psychologically safe and intellectually humble remarks.
Mhm.
Now,
Mhm.
in that psychological safety and intellectually humbly presentation, do you find that there is core emotion or core value that seems to be wanting to be expressed that hasn't been able to
Uh,
because of the societal structures we've had?
well, I think the fear of being judged, the fear of being rejected, the fear of abandonment keeps a lot of people um, from speaking their voice, from speaking from their heart.
Hmm.
You can say something, you know, you can address an issue, say something to a person in a from a place of compassion, and it'll be received totally different than if you came from a critical place. So
Absolutely.
if you've got judgment in your voice, if you've got um you're criticizing, and you've got this, you know, people feel that your words contain, energy and the
Or
intention
vibration,
and the and
right?
right, like what are your intentions with these words? You can say the exact same words in a mean way or in a loving way, and they're going to be taken in two different ways, even though you're saying the same thing. And it's because of that energy that's behind those words.
Sure. And with
And we're not mindful of that. We're not aware of that. We're just reacting. But if we maintain heart coherence and we maintain that executive thinking capacity, let's my intention is to be a compassionate human being. How can I bridge this and just address the issue
hmm
in a way that'll be well received? How can I
kind of like
do
hit
this?
the pause button when you get triggered, right? The first
Pause.
thing that happens, you hit the pause button, take a
Pause.
breath and recenter and recognize that yes, you're sensing this energy from another because that's how we're built, right?
Yeah,
The 85% of communication happens non-verbally and energetically rather than the
energetically.
voice and
Right.
tone, right?
Right.
Part of it. In this transceivership of our bodies, if you will, we have various systems, the chakras, then we've got
Mm,
also the indigenous three brain system, the gut, the heart, and the head. And
right.
the gut feels everything. Since we know from quantum physics now that everything's vibration, how would we
Mm,
be designed to navigate that? We have
mm-hmm.
the sensory array to do so, right?
Right.
We don't recognize that. So we get the gut, we get the hit in the gut, and right away we judge because we don't distill it in the heart to figure out where it's coming from and how to deal with it. And then we have a reactionary interaction
Mm-hmm.
instead of a mindful one. Whereas if you would have processed it first with the gut, recognize, okay, this doesn't feel so good. Is it intentional? Is it is it desirable or undesirable? And then
Mm-hmm.
what do I do with it in a kind, compassionate way?
Mm-hmm.
Is that something? Because it's a behavior mod program, right? If you want to look at it from that perspective, how do we facilitate that in common conversations? What's the key features of that, and especially in facilitating social change, how does that work in spilling out into the neighborhood, so to speak?
Well, any kind of societal change it's going to be, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be a challenging thing, and it's going to be really important to maintain that anchor within ourselves and to breathe, to really understand there's so much power in the breath. And when we pause and when we use the breath to slow down that stress response and just be with that uncomfortable emotion, and then with just that intention to bridge and build understanding. Staying coherent, staying heart coherent is the key to bridging. If we can't maintain a heart coherent state when we attempt to bridge with someone who maybe perceives things differently, it's going to trigger things. And if we're not heart coherent, if we're not present with our who we are inside and just anchored in that inner knowing, that intention,
Hmm.
um, we can easily start reacting. And
For
when we're
sure.
reacting, that's when things fall apart.
And they fall apart very well, only to come back together. They say this oftentimes breakthrough is a series of breakdowns. In this, you mentioned the anchor, right?
Mm.
What is that? We hear the term is, I anchor, I center, I get grounded. What's that mean to you?
For me, it means feeling my heart and just being centered into that heart space, just focusing on it,
Hmm. Yeah.
feeling the sensations, knowing that It's going to be okay. And just be with this moment. Just be with this discomfort right now, and it'll pass. And then when it passes, that discomfort lifts. And it always does, because a feeling
Hmm.
fully felt passes through. When we allow the feelings to pass, we grow a little more every time we move through it.
Sure. You almost become more permeable in allowing that energy to flow through you rather than get
Mm-hmm.
stuck in you.
Mm-hmm. It's like layers of an onion.
Yeah.
Every time we heal a new layer, and it happens, it's like waves, it's like grieving. Grieving never stops once you have experienced a loss, or if you have some kind of a trauma. It's
Hmm.
like people often mistake healing as, oh, I'm healed, it'll never happen again. That's not true. What's true is you're still going to have things come up from the past. You're still going to have experiences of these emotions, but every time the tide rolls in, you're going to have the tools to be able to sit with it, process it, and let it move.
Hmm.
Because sometimes that's all we have to do is just let it move, let
Sure.
it pass. Feel it to heal it. Just let it pass.
Now, you mentioned heart coherence, and this is a term I believe that comes out of the Heart Math Institute, of which you're associated with. Can you explain a little bit about what heart math is and what that is designed to do to help in this kind of um, coherence?
So, coherence is an optimal state of functioning. It's when the heart and mind, because we have electromagnetic activity happening, and when the heart and the mind are together, their patterns are rising and falling in sync. Whereas when it's not together, it's really jagged. And so coherence is a state of optimal functioning, and we can achieve that by a daily breath practice that um, it's like exercise. It's like building that muscle. You can't go to a gym and then after one day expect to have this,
Sure.
really
Yeah.
buffs, set
You
of
can't go
muscle.
through a drive-through. It's not like going through
No.
McDonald's. There's no enlightenment. There's discipline and practice
Yeah,
to it.
it's a it, we have coherent muscles, and that is when we drop the heart into the mind, and we focus the breath, and we use the breath to breathe deeply and slowly through the heart, and we release thoughts, and we focus and use the breath, and we build that muscle. And ideally, we're doing this a few times a day, 5 minutes, 3 times a day. Um, and over time, we start to build more resiliency
Right.
throughout our day. But it's not something that happens overnight.
Sure.
It takes a daily practice to build that muscle. So coherence is like an energetic, emotional muscle. And when we do it, we're actually recharging our inner battery when we do that.
Thank you very
And
much.
that's what makes us resilient.
Now, in that um, s- desire for coherence, is there a deeper desire that's present? And I often think that, our core is really about loving and being loved. And
Mm.
that's what we seek. We don't really understand what that truly is. However, we talk about it a lot, right? We try to get there and then we fight ourselves in the process of trying to control and dominate and, do all those kind of human things. But this is more of an acquiescence to rather than a grabbing a hold of, right? Would that be kind of what the process that heart math and these processes accomplish?
Well, heart math is just a piece of the work that I
Right.
do, and it was one of the first uh the first practices, the first methods that I learned that really helped me in my own healing
Mhm.
journey. And I've since discovered, you know, a lot of different methods and authors and teachers that really helped me along the way. And it really comes down to an inner decision, an inner decision to allow the heart to lift us up. Because the heart is a powerful thing, you know?
Absolutely. Truly.
Yeah.
And you can sense it. You know, it's what came to mind several years ago is at least and I say I think, and you're gonna, and I'm gonna counter that. So we can't think our way through a system built on vibration. We have to
Hmm.
sense our way through it. So this is, to me, part of that evolutionary leap that we're having now that is a result of questioning everything during the recent kerfuffle that we had and the global shutdown. People
Hmm.
started asking questions of, who am I? What do I really believe in? What am I willing to do about that? Am I do I love myself?
Hmm.
And we often, think that's a little nihilistic or egotistical, egomaniacal. But when you think about self-love, you've got to take care of yourself. You've got to be in that place before you can share it with another. So this inner work to get there seems imperative in order for the rest of us to move forward collectively. How do you see that taking place through the work that you do, and what do you find some of the effective tools for that are?
Yeah. So, excuse me, my dog is having a fit right now. Um,
I love it when the little ones enter in.
yeah. Yeah, she's being really vocal right now. I don't
Not
know if you
coming
can
through on
hear.
this end.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool. Um, you know, it's where we are in the world right now is that there's a lot of division going on, and it's driven by fear. There's a lot of fear that's driving humanity, and we're fearful and of people who are not like us. We're fearful of people who think differently than us. And I think a lot of us are now starting to learn to allow, to surrender to what is, you know, to surrender and to just allow things to be what they are, and trust. And that's so hard. It's so hard to trust when you don't see what's coming, or when things are uncertain. It's so hard to trust in the process. It's
If you
so
trust
hard.
yourself implicitly, is it easier to trust the environment you're in?
It's easier to navigate because we can then accept whatever's happening outside of us is that's just the way it is. That's not on us.
Hmm.
And we can just just let it go. You know, we can just let things like that go and not,
Or choose how to participate.
right?
Have a
Or choose
conscious
how to
choice
participate.
rather than feel pushed and pulled and not in
Hmm.
control. Because the only thing that we do have control of is that choice and our own capacity for navigation, right?
Yeah, well, I think control is an illusion for sure.
Absolutely.
Control is definitely an illusion.
And
And
yet, there's a larger aspect of it that seems to be in place when you do surrender, that when you do seek inner guidance and then you pay attention to it, there's this
hmm.
capacity. I don't know if it's universal law or infinite intelligence or God or whatever you want to call it. It's this conscious intelligence that wants the best for you.
Right, right.
Or maybe not wants the best. I'll say it, there's a that's neutral, that based on your choice is supportive of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because that speaks to our ability to create, whether we realize it or not. And if you don't think you
Right.
are a creator, go inside, examine how you're thinking and feeling, and look at the environment around you and see how it's reflecting. It'll give you an
Exactly.
idea of whether, you know, you're
Yeah.
congruent or not, or coherent in that fashion.
Right. And when you're coming from a place where all of this is new
Mm.
and you don't understand what's going on, there can be a lot of fear behind that. And that's
Oh,
why
absolutely.
in
It's
those
freaky.
instances, yeah,
It is freaky
yeah,
to be that sensitive and all of a sudden, feel almost like your body is being moved beyond something that you're able to manage because you've allowed yourself to be sensitive to it.
mm-hmm,
So that's the first, it's like you open that door, it's like, whoa, where am I going? And you start, and yet there's a certain amount of trust and courage,
yeah,
fearlessness
courage,
in that.
courage, yeah, for
Radically,
sure.
and being radically curious in some cases too.
Mm-hmm,
It seems the truth loves to be questioned. How else do we
mm-hmm.
prove it?
Right.
Right? You can't trust anything that you can't prove. Yet there's a certain amount of faith that you can based on the evidence of what you've been given to date in those moments of that sense of connectedness and coherence.
Mm-hmm,
How do you find ways to have that more repeatable? Is it, beyond the discipline, beyond the
mm-hmm,
practice, what are some of the internalizations of the considerations that you have in the process of that and your relationship to your own belief about yourself?
okay. Well, I first of all, when I find myself uh in a triggered state, I go inward and I ask myself, what am I feeling right now? Where is this coming from? How am I feeling? What is this that I'm feeling? Where am I feeling it? And then I just relax into it. And I don't try to think about it. I don't try to think back on bad memories. I don't try to think of old stories, this is happening because of this or that, the other.
Yeah.
It's just being present and still with what I'm feeling and self-soothing. It's going to be okay. We just got to move through this. It's going to be okay. And I breathe. I
Mhm.
breathe through it. And that's how I get through it.
And it's rarely, if ever, an experience of a life-threatening moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, we're, I guess I started to use the word blessed for those kinds of conditions here in America and in other places in the world. But there's some places, man, that um, we just aren't taking care of one another. We're allowing things to happen, the chaos, the um, degradation, the
Mm-hmm.
mistreatment of others. And it would seem that if we were a conscious planet or we had a conscious society and we lived with what we preach to others we believe, that those devastated areas would be the first ones we'd address.
Mm.
Because I that's just my own feeling and opinion, right? But the obviousness of it is that we talk a lot. We don't do a lot of walking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What would that walk look like to you?
Well, it would be work, making sure that my coherence is strong, making sure that my resiliency is built up daily so that I can face all the challenges that come my way. And sometimes there's going to be days when they're going to be, there's good and bad days. And on those bad days, I just have to allow and be with what is and breathe through it and know that it's going to be okay and
Hmm.
find that foundation to of courage. I got this. I can handle this. I can do this. This is just a feeling. It's just a feeling. It's going to move. I just got to be with it. And then I'm still. And then I'm breathing through it. And it always moves.
Hmm.
And then I feel much stronger when it moves.
Now, does it happen a lot quicker than talking about it, right? In those moments? Because, we're both professionals. We've been in high stress, high activity, production environments, manufacturing and service organizations, things of that nature. When we're in that flow of perceived order, what are the things that can happen or ways that others who are experiencing this constriction in the workplace, let's say, how can that or these practices benefit that? And is there a way to incorporate them and not be that obvious to others? Because that's one of the
Mm-hmm.
things that, people are like, well, you're going to be doing this, you're going to do that, you're carrying around sage or you're wearing a bunch of beads. Or, this isn't that, right?
Mm-mm.
That's all just accoutrements to show off, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Because the real work's inside and in
Mm-hmm.
behavior towards others. So
Mm-hmm.
how would you suggest that using these kinds of things would work in um, stressful places in the workplace or in adversarial places?
Well, the thing to remember is that when we do keep a daily practice, we also strengthen our awareness of our inner state. And so during work, it's really important to take breath breaks. 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. And no one has to know that you're doing it. You just have to do it
Mm.
and just breathe deeply and slowly through the heart. Just
It's
breathe.
so different today. When I was in my initial dive into the corporate world, I worked for an aerospace company, and youngest person, I was advanced because of my work and promoted, and then rose to the top on a production chart of a 35 member department. And unbeknownst, I was the youngest one in the department too. And I had a couple of supervisors come to me and ask me how I was doing that. I had no idea, right? I was just having fun, getting along, doing stuff. And I had to think for a moment. I said, well, it's just interpersonal skills. I live by the golden rule. I do my best to help others do their job while they're doing stuff for me. And if I can do something else and I have the time to do so, then I offer that as well. And it's amazing the difference that it made, especially in a command and control environment where the usual behavior is first a no, and then a person of thinking they're superior, trying to beat the other over the head with threats of going to their boss to get what they need, right? How many
Mm-hmm.
times does that happen? This is in the 80s.
Yeah.
So what interpersonal skills classes were then was basically understanding emotional intelligence and how to deal with it today. And yet it was a mess then. Today is far different. There's all kinds of activity now in corporate worlds to servant leadership being one of those opportunities that's being explored,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which the leader serves the people, not the opposite,
Mm-hmm.
which is what the old paradigm is. How do you see these activities that you're doing reflecting that and uh, assisting in this upwising, if you will, within corporate America.
Well, I help leaders activate their inner resources, their self-awareness, their connection to the inner battery that must be recharged. Because if we don't recharge it, it will get depleted. And that's what the daily practice is about.
Mhm,
And then I also help leaders activate another inner resource is the inner GPS, so that the intuitive gift that we have naturally, the intuitive equipment that helps us tap into the energetics of what's happening around us, so we can, because there's a lot of information there that we
mhm,
won't pick up if we don't tune into it. So I work with leaders to hone those skills so that they can resource themselves, so they can be tapped into their inner wisdom, so that they can be fully resourced and able to handle the challenges of the day-to-day life, and also be able to tap into the undercurrents. What's
mhm.
going on in the undercurrents? Because there's a lot of information here, and then that information can help us develop informed intuition, which then helps us make smarter decisions. And that's how I help leaders.
Good. And we don't, I say we, those who have not been in leadership roles like that don't often recognize or realize the kind of stress that's involved because of the responsibilities. Most workers, they're responsible for their desk and, maybe working with a few people. And then as you rise up in that hierarchical structure, there's more and more responsibility um, from a fiduciary standpoint, as well as a human resource and safety and security standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where people can feel that they're supported in the work
Mm-hmm.
rather than just filling a spot, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So and essentially, we're talking about building community within an organization. How do you see that trickle down through the organization, or what would be a noticeable difference in it when these practices are um, made by and changes are made by the leadership?
Well, when leadership, when the energy of the leadership changes, it changes the people, because you've got that the energetics of, how can I support you? You matter. I want to support you. How can we work together to make this better?
Mhm.
I care. I care and I want to support. How can we make this better? You know?
What I hear you saying, it is all in how we speak to others, the compassion, the kindness that we use in that opportunity to work together to accomplish a common goal. When you're
Mm,
inside a company, you have a mission and vision that everybody is working toward. How well
mm-hmm.
that's related and the culture that's created around that is up to the leadership. And when these changes are made, do you stick around long enough to see what the results in the company are? Do you get reports back, see the increase in production or output or um,
Yeah, people I've
financial
worked
gain?
with, they keep in touch with me, and I get to hear all kinds of wonderful results. One of my clients was going through her doctorate's degree and raising 6 grandkids, and took over as a program manager for a behavioral health company. And I hear from her all the time about how these tools really help, because it's about making them yours and then putting them to use. And
Mhm.
it becomes a lifeline, and it still helps her. And she keeps in touch with me. Absolutely. I don't expect to be tied to people forever. I know that once they develop they have that toolbox and they have the routines and they know what they're supposed to do. I've done my job. And
Yeah,
if they want extra support, they're absolutely more than welcome to. I'm happy to support. But I know it's not meant to be a lifelong thing. It's meant to support
sure.
them and having the tools, and then the practices, and then the strategies, and then that sense of self, and those once those inner resources are activated and strengthened, they grow. And as they grow, so do we.
It makes sense. And the obvious would, like, yeah, this is something that, getting along, working together for a common goal, unless it's not I'd say unless it's not a life-friendly activity. And even then that those things matter. However, as we're engaging in these practices, life becomes more precious. And it would seem that there would be a rising desire to change whatever leadership is promoting those kinds
Mm-hmm.
of activities. And especially right now, that it's even though we're trying to make evergreen content, there's this notion right now that there's some concern, and there's some hope
Mm,
as well as these voices are being raised that are tired of treating others like they're not like us.
mm-hmm.
I opened the
Mm,
show with Namaste in Lak'ech. Namaste is a Sanskrit greeting. I worship that which is within you, is originally what it
mm-hmm.
meant. And then in Lak'ech is a Mayan phrase that means I am another you. So
Mm,
as we, grow in these things, we come to recognize, and maybe you can validate this too, is that we see ourselves in others and we want to
mm,
understand what we don't see of ourselves in the others so that we're better attuned. Even
mm-hmm.
Covey, but his fifth habit is seek to understand before
Yeah,
being understood.
yeah.
Conflict. I had a mentor, a dear friend, um, probably 20 years, my senior lawyer, um, was into alternate dispute resolution.
Mm-hmm.
And he said to me at one point that, there really is no conflict. There's just miscommunication.
Mm,
And you stop
mm-hmm.
and think, it's okay, so what does that really mean? Well, you come to the table with your dictionary, you speak and listen to and from it,
Mm-hmm.
and the other person has one too,
Mm-hmm.
but it's different than yours.
Right,
So
right,
then how that sameness is navigated is up to the kinds of practices and questions and presence that is brought into that situation. Recognize that, okay, and maybe it's the beginning of we're really saying the same thing differently. We just need to figure it out.
right.
Because
Mm,
we all want the same thing, right? We want to love and be loved. Well, that trickles out into the things that we think mean that, as far as, the contracts and the awards and, negotiating salaries and things of that nature. That's all part of that. And yet it's not the fulfillment of it. It's the trickle down of the result of it being done effectively. Would you agree with that?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that uh not being on the same page is the number one thing to look for. It's like, okay, are we on the same? Clearly, we're not on the same page.
But we often assume we are.
How yeah, but when you feel that dissonance, when you feel that tension, and clearly something, we're not on the same page, you feel that. And then we can stop and ask ourselves, okay, well, apparently we're not on the same page. what can I do to help us
Hmm.
get everyone on the same page? And everyone's not going to get on the same page at the same time, at the same pace. Sometimes it takes a person a little longer to get on the same page, and we have to be able to sense that and give the grace to allow that person to get on the same page so we can have a
Hmm.
meaningful conversation.
Or you even recognize the trigger in yourself and go, wait a minute. Okay,
Yeah.
what happened here? Am I understanding what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Even when you come, I did partnering workshops for
Mm-hmm.
building road and bridge construction for 20 years, and construction environments are the most adversarial ones you can get into at times.
Mm.
And yet there's this capacity to engage another. What do you think is that core capacity that we have to engage another from that place of seeking coherence?
Remaining open, remaining receptive, understanding that people are going to be thinking differently,
Hmm. Now, that's the passive side of it. What's the active side?
asking questions to understand. How, help me understand. I want to understand.
Hmm. Nonviolent communication, right? Those are things that we don't often consider of how we speak to another as to whether we're intending to cause a trigger
Mm-hmm.
or pull one. I
Mm-hmm.
love my dad taught me when I was younger, when I was in my going through my judgmental stage, he said, "Well, be careful. When you point a finger, you've got three coming back at you, so you better have at least three solutions to apply, or don't open your mouth."
Mm.
Now, that didn't always work. Most of the time I only had one or two, but it's still, when you're facilitating people, places, and things to do things in massive ways, you've really got to consider that.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're just another piece of you. Every person you touch is just another piece of you that you're becoming aware of again, perhaps. Um, we there's all kinds of things we could go down the rabbit hole as far as having been here before and karmic returns and all those kinds of things, um, which may or may not be applicable. But that's also part of, what would you say that that's also part of recognizing what those traumas, as you're analyzing the whys, for the triggers and the sensations and things like that, how deep does that go sometimes? Do you find that there are um, instances that don't feel like they've come from this life and have been a recurring pattern that they're addressing? Are there those types of recognitions or realizations in your clients?
Well, that's human nature, right?
Mm,
Like we all have the, from epigenetics. If you've studied Bruce Lipton, Dr. Bruce Lipton and his work in epigenetics,
Swami, actually,
trauma.
I mentioned Swami, pardon me. I'm kind of neurodiverse and will butt in anywhere sometimes, but hopefully, forgive me. Swami Beyondananda, Steve Berman, co-wrote Conscious Evolution with Bruce Lipton,
Mm,
and a phenomenal book. Anyway, Steve was an early guest on One World. I've known him for, I don't know, gosh, too long, 30 years, something like that.
yeah.
Time flies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how does time fly for you
One day at a time.
when you're
One
in
day at a
this
time, living
practice?
in the present.
When you're in this practice and you're in an activity, what do you notice the differences in how time feels in those different kinds of situations?
In what way?
Whether it feels fast, slow, rushed, um, or whether you have a sense of time at all.
Well, when I'm working on something, time flies. When
Hmm.
I'm working on something that I'm really engaged in, yeah, time will fly. But when I allow myself to be still, time slows down and I can just be in the moment. I wasn't always able to do that, but I
Oh, it
did
takes
learn.
practice. I mean,
Yeah.
even the best of us, it, I- anything that you master, what was it that says 10,000 hours of practice, I think was the statistic that I heard recently in order to master anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You can be good at something and still not master it. Still, it gives you an idea of the amount of time that is required, right?
Mm-hmm.
To engage, have patience with the process.
That's big.
And isn't
That's big.
everything a process?
Everything is a process. Yes.
What are some of those processes that you recognize in yourself that have been the most beneficial?
That I'm constantly evolving, that I'm constantly growing, and that whatever new thing that I encounter that I have to learn, I have to be patient with it, one step at a time.
There's stuff going on a little deeper than that. I'd like you to kind of settle into that. And, are there specific notions, thoughts, sensations that you draw upon to bring present because the file's already there and you're just pulling it up into the present? That makes sense?
Well, I'm always cultivating that sense of inner peace. It's something that I'm always working on because um there's a lot of stuff that comes up from the past, right? So, and sometimes it just comes up, and it's just an ever evolving thing, and I have to be patient with it, and
Mhm.
I stay true to myself, and I know that that inner peace is something that is cultivated over time, and there's really no arrival. It's just a journey.
And that's the wonderful thing about it is there's always something ahead of you, right?
Yeah,
There's
right.
never an end point. Now, you talk about the internal. How do you recognize and you're looking around in the external world as you're going through this centering, grounding, coherence process? What do you notice that reflects back to you that you pick up on perhaps quicker than others? What do you notice first in your environment of how that change is recognized and reflected?
um Well, when I'm out and about in the world, I notice that people are really in their own, they're in their own place. They're
Their bubble.
not really, yeah, they're in a bubble. And I can see them there. I can see them there. And they're just busy. They're in the routine and the busyness of their lives,
Hmm.
going here, going there, taking care of this, taking care of that, and just that's where they are.
Hmm.
And so I've just come to really learn to just, you know,
Be
just
present,
a
right? Do
just
you work
just
with groups from time to time?
oh yeah, I do.
When you're in those, do you notice, and you're probably in a different role rather than a functional member of a team, you're probably a consultant too. However, do you notice when you are, I'll say, silently practicing your craft, Do you notice a change in the behaviors of others in the room? Because stepping in, right, you just observe what's going on to figure
Mm-hmm.
out the playing field that you're on and who the runner or who the team players are and how they're behaving towards one another. That's a really, like that 5 to 7 second snapshot that you get of somebody when you first meet them and you size them up and you make certain, you know, assessments, if you will. What do you notice in the transition, or is it that demonstrable? Because it seems like it would be from the time you enter a room that's been out of kilter
Mm-hmm.
to the time that it's more coherent. What do you see in the change of behaviors of the team members?
Appreciation, a lot of appreciation, a lot of thank you for doing what you do. I, because it's like they come together. Uh, they they start in a dysregulated place, and by the end of um, the time together, there is a there is a coming home that happens,
Hmm. That's a
and
demonstrable shift, huh?
and a lot of times they don't realize that's, because they weren't aware, but when they become aware of it
Mhm.
and they come home to themselves, and there's that just this sense of peace there, and there's a lot of gratitude, a lot of appreciation, a lot of love. It's really a beautiful thing, and I've had the privilege of witnessing that a lot, and it,
Wonderful to
it truly
experience,
is,
isn't it?
it's a
Yeah,
beautiful gift for me.
it is. And like you said, the critical point of that is the awareness. Because
Mm-hmm.
the behaviors are usually unconscious because of whatever, whether it's trauma or programming or whatever that their history has been,
Mm-hmm.
because it's worked for them. Now they're in a place where things aren't working as well, and they've got to be able to advance in their own evolutionary process to be more of a part of the team cohesiveness, not just the
Mm-hmm.
coherence.
Right.
Do you see this kind of activity becoming more present in small businesses, um, and or what are the challenges to gaining popularity more in the larger corporate environment? Because still seems to be a numbers driven, not necessarily a people driven environment.
Yeah, so there's a lot of skepticism that is a hurdle for sure.
Mhm.
Um, and I think skepticism is natural, right? It's natural. Um,
I think it can be healthy in a lot of ways.
well, of course it can be healthy. It can definitely be healthy. I think it's a matter of discernment
Mhm.
and being aware of things a little more, and um, understanding that when we are in a physiological optimal state, like we are in a calm place, that we're going to show up in our best form, and we're going to maintain access to the prefrontal cortex where our executive functioning lives,
Mhm.
instead of allowing the stress response to shut that access. And now we're only reacting from our amygdala,
Right.
because it's that reaction, that
We're human,
reactive.
not reptile, right?
Yeah, it's that reactionary state that is what causes stress, what causes us to snap at people, what causes us to, it just, it is at the core of the disharmony.
Yeah. Yeah. And forgiveness is always a good thing. And saying thank you, please, and being willing to admit the challenges one faces. Because oftentimes, do you find that there's some in some of these processes that there's divulging of how a person got to that trigger point, or what caused it in a reflection, so that there's greater understanding and maybe compassion towards it?
I think compassion is huge. I think I think if we are more compassionate with each other, we can, you know, give grace. This person apparently is having a hard time, and um, we all have our moments. We all have
Absolutely.
those moments when we're not at our best.
Well, and the fear
And
is sharing secrets that are going to be used against you in the future, right? That's
well,
one of the processes that's happened in our society.
well, it comes down to, can I trust this person?
Mhm.
Can I trust this person to be vulnerable with them? Because some people you can't be vulnerable with them because you can't trust them. Trust is so important. Establishing that mutual trust, eliminating fear, establishing mutual trust and respect, maintaining coherent communication. These are the three top leadership imperatives.
Hmm.
And if somebody who doesn't trust is not going to be vulnerable. I mean, I can't blame them. If they're in an environment that is unsafe, of course they're not going to be vulnerable. Of course they're not going to reveal themselves, or even take the chance of sharing how they're feeling, unless they really can trust
Hmm.
that the other person is going to receive it and not judge or be critical of them.
What do you find challenging for yourself in these situations?
Well, when someone in the past, I used to get very hurt by it. Now I don't allow stuff like that to hurt, because it's not my business what other people think of me. It's not my business. And how people think of me is a projection of where they are and not who I am. So
Sure.
I don't let it bother me.
Interesting paradox there, right? The doesn't matter what I think, feel, or believe about myself and how others perceive me. And then it doesn't matter what others perceive about me, but what I think, feel, and believe about myself, right? So, how do you find harmony between those two aspects of being?
Um, well, if I'm attached to an ideal, if I'm attached to things, then it's going to be hard. But if I remain unattached to either my thinking or someone else's thinking, then I'm fine.
Hmm.
Because my mind only knows where it's been, right? It's
Yeah.
only gonna, it only, so I'm just going to release. I'm just going to be with what is, and I'm not going to judge whether it's myself or it's coming from someone else.
Then comes the inquiry, is what did you mean by that? I heard you say this, but I'm not quite sure. Could you unpack that a little bit, please? Right? And see where that conversation goes in the layers that can be peeled back to examine the capacity to find a union with the other, as opposed, or a better dance at least. Right?
Hmm.
What do you do when we're getting kind of close to time, and so I'd love to have a tasty tidbit of some kind of a potential technique or something that an individual might be able to use who finds themselves in a place where there's this wonky energy and they're not quite sure what to do about it.
Certainly. So it's a technique that was introduced by the Heart Math Institute. It's called heart focused breathing. And you can do this anywhere. You can do it with your eyes open or closed. And the way it goes is, well, you focus your attention in the area of the heart. And you imagine the breath flowing in and out through the heart, deeper and slower than usual, with 5 seconds on the in breath, 5 seconds on the out breath, or whatever's comfortable.
It's amazing how inspiration happens.
Mm.
Right? Not just aspiration, inspiration. Um, Such an inspiring conversation with you, Suzette. It's just been a great conversation, and I love how you presented the whole notion of being able to find peace and harmony through the work that you're doing and helping the leadership of organizations find that within themselves too.
Yeah, it's an honor. There's an honor in this work. I
It,
feel very, very honored to help in that way. I feel
just,
called to this work.
I'm hip to that, and it's a wonderful calling, isn't it?
Yeah.
Not an easy one to navigate sometimes, and yet that's as we proceed with our own self growth, so we
Mm-hmm.
bring others along with us.
Right.
Super. I really appreciate your time, Suzette, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Zen. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And namaste and in la catch. And thanks for sticking with us for this episode of One World in a New World. I'm your host, Zen Benefiel, and I'll see you next time.